One honeybee produces 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her entire lifetime. She visits 2,000 flowers. She flies the equivalent of 1.5 times around the earth. She works for 6 weeks straight until her wings literally wear out and she dies. That is what it takes to make enough honey to sweeten a single cup of tea. You have probably bought honey dozens of times without thinking about any of that. You see a plastic bear on the shelf. The label says 100% pure honey. You assume it went through the same inspections as organic milk or grass-fed beef. But here is something that might surprise you. The FDA tested commercial honey in 2011 and found that 76% of samples bought from grocery stores contained zero pollen. No pollen means no way to trace where it came from. Some of it contains no actual honey at all, just corn syrup or rice syrup with added color and flavor. And the reason it passed inspection is simple. There is almost no inspection. How did an ancient food produced by bees for millions of years turn into one of the most fraudulent products on American grocery shelves? Humans have harvested honey for 8,000 years, but the modern honey industry changed in the 1970s when cheap honey from China began flooding the US market. In 1975, the United States produced over 200 million pounds of honey per year. By 2000, production had dropped to 150 million pounds, but Americans were consuming 400 million pounds annually. The gap was filled by imports. China became the world's largest honey producer, churning out over 1 million metric tons per year, and that is when the fraud began. Here is how real honey is made. Bees collect nectar from flowers. The nectar is about 80% water. Worker bees store it in honeycomb cells and fan their wings to evaporate the moisture. Over several days, the water content drops from 80% down to below 18.6%. That is the legal threshold in the United States. Anything above 18.6% water will ferment. Once it hits that number, bees seal the cell with a wax cap. A single bee produces about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her lifetime. Commercial beekeepers wait until at least 75% of the cells are capped, then they pull the frames. They use a hot knife or an uncapping roller to remove the wax seal. The frames go into a centrifuge that spins at 200 to 300 RPM. Centrifugal force throws the honey out against the walls. It drips to the bottom and flows through a coarse screen to catch wax particles. Most small-scale beekeepers stop there. The honey still contains pollen grains, bee parts, tiny wax fragments. It looks cloudy. It crystallizes within weeks or months because the pollen particles give sugar crystals something to form around. This is raw honey. Large-scale commercial operations take it further. They heat the honey to between 150 and 170 degrees Fahrenheit to make it flow faster. Then they push it through fine mesh filters to remove particles larger than 20 to 100 microns. Pollen grains are typically 15 to 100 microns in diameter, so most of them get caught. The honey comes out clearer and stays liquid longer. This is standard filtration, and it is still considered real honey by the FDA. The pollen count drops, but some remains. But here is where the deception happens. Some processors use ultrafiltration. They force honey through membranes with pore sizes as small as 0.2 microns under high pressure. This removes every single pollen grain. It also removes proteins, enzymes, and trace minerals. What comes out the other side is a crystal clear liquid that will never crystallize because there is nothing left for sugar crystals to cling to. It can sit on a shelf for years without changing texture. And because there is no pollen, there is no way to determine its geographic origin. Once the honey has been ultrafiltered, it moves through the rest of the commercial production line. It flows through heated pipes into large blending tanks, where batches from different suppliers and different countries get combined into a single, uniform product. From the blending tanks, it goes to filling machines that pump the liquid into squeeze bottles at up to 120 units per minute. A labeling machine wraps each bottle with a country of origin and the words 100% pure honey. The whole operation runs 16 to 20 hours a day. By the time that plastic bear reaches the shelf, it may contain honey from a dozen different sources across 4 or 5 countries, blended beyond any possibility of separation or identification. In 2008, the United States imposed anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese honey after discovering widespread contamination with illegal antibiotics and heavy metals. Chinese honey imports dropped overnight, but the amount of honey on American shelves did not change. Instead, Chinese honey started arriving with labels from India, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Brokers in those countries would buy Chinese honey, run it through ultrafiltration to erase all pollen fingerprints, and re-export it with a new country of origin label. This process is called honey laundering. Food Safety News commissioned lab tests in 2011. They bought honey from major grocery chains, drugstores, and big box retailers. 76% of samples from grocery stores had zero pollen. 100% of samples from drugstores like Walgreens and CVS had zero pollen. 100% of honey from fast food chains and individual packets had zero pollen. Meanwhile, every sample from farmers markets and co-ops contained pollen. The FDA was asked to comment. Their response was that they do not have a standard of identity for honey, so they could not determine what qualifies as real honey. They did state in 2011 that if a product has been ultra-filtered to remove pollen, it cannot technically be identified as honey. But enforcement is nearly non-existent. Then there is the outright fake honey. Labs have found bottles labeled pure honey that contain no honey at all. Just high fructose corn syrup, rice syrup, or beet syrup mixed with artificial color and flavor compounds. Some blends contain 10 to 20% real honey mixed with 70 to 80% syrup. The label still says 100% honey because there is no mandatory lab testing before it hits the shelf. In 2013, German authorities tested honey samples and found that 1 in 4 was adulterated. In 2020, a study published in Nature found that nearly half of tested honey samples showed signs of adulteration with added sugars. The only reliable way to detect fake honey is through advanced lab testing. Nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy can identify added syrups by analyzing the carbon isotope ratios in sugars. Pollen analysis can reveal geographic origin if any pollen remains, but these tests cost hundreds of dollars per sample. Grocery stores do not run them. Customs officials spot check less than 2% of imported honey shipments. So the fraud continues. Here's where the story flips. Not every company that ultrafilters honey is trying to commit fraud. There are legitimate reasons to remove pollen. Ultrafiltration extends shelf life. It prevents crystallization, which American consumers associate with spoiled honey, even though crystallization is a natural process. It creates a uniform product that looks the same in every bottle. For large food manufacturers supplying honey to restaurants, bakeries, and packaged food companies, consistency matters more than trace minerals. And from a business perspective, honey that never crystallizes means fewer customer complaints and returns. The real problem is not the technology, it is the lack of transparency. In Europe, any honey that has been ultrafiltered must be labeled as baker's honey and cannot be sold as table honey. In the United States, there is no such distinction. A bottle of ultrafiltered pollen-free syrup can sit next to raw honeycomb on the same shelf with no indication of the difference. The consumer has no way to know what they are buying unless they understand the code. And then there are the small-scale beekeepers who do the opposite. They extract honey, strain out the big chunks of wax, and bottle it. It looks cloudy. It smells like the flowers the bees visited. It crystallizes within a month. If you put it in the fridge, it turns solid. But that cloudiness is proof. Those particles are pollen, propolis, bits of wax, the things that show it came from an actual hive. And if you send it to a lab, the pollen signature will tell you exactly where the bees foraged, sometimes down to a 10-mile radius. Now try this. Next time you are in the grocery store, check the label. If it says product of more than one country or packed in USA, that is a red flag. Real honey does not need to be packed anywhere. It comes out of the hive ready to eat. Look for labels that say raw, unfiltered, or unheated. Check for a specific region or state. Florida orange blossom honey, North Dakota clover honey, Vermont wildflower honey. If the label lists a single origin and the honey looks a little cloudy, that is a good sign. Pick up the bottle and look at the texture. If it is perfectly clear like corn syrup and has been sitting on the shelf for months without any crystallization, it has been heavily processed or it is not honey. Real honey starts to crystallize after a few weeks or months, especially in cooler temperatures. If you see fine sugar crystals forming at the bottom, that is not a defect, that is proof. If you want to go further, find a local beekeeper and buy directly. Or look for honey certified by the True Source Honey Program, which requires independent supply chain auditing. These are not foolproof, but they are the closest thing to a guarantee the current system offers. The next time you reach for that plastic bear, flip it over and read the fine print. Check the country of origin. Look for the word raw or unfiltered. If it does not say either, assume it has been processed. If it says product of multiple countries, assume it has been laundered through a third country to hide its origin. And if it is cheaper than bottled water, ask yourself how that is possible when a single bee spends her entire life making 1/12 of a teaspoon. That is the process. We reveal how things actually work, one story at a time. If there is something you would like us to explore next, let us know. Until then, trust the process.